Well, urban renewal is being applied globally, but it's not always as successful as it could be, especially not for poorer communities pushed out by rising prices. Well, for more perspective on that, I'm joined live from New York City by Marjora Carter. She's an urban revitalization strategy consultant and public radio host. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So give us an idea of some great examples of urban renewal projects that have worked around the world and some examples of failures.
Some examples. I think it's one of the biggest successes is actually in Bogota, Colombia. Both the mayoral administrations from Moscow and Peñalosa actually outlawed traffic on some major thoroughfares, literally recreated the city's thoroughfares as ways to get poor people who make up a bulk of the population but often have difficulty getting through. And basically designed a transportation system, public transportation system, bike paths to really create the kind of equality of transportation that allowed folks to get where they were going. And I've also created some great projects myself, which makes me really happy, from transforming parks into dumps to really looking at talent retention as a real estate development strategy to redevelop our communities as well.
Now, it can be tough, a double-edged sword, because one of the main criticisms of urban renewal is that it displaces local residents and small businesses as some of these rents go up and affordable housing diminishes. How is it possible to have urban renewal without widening inequality in the process?
Right. That's why we take a talent retention approach to our redevelopment projects. Specifically, what that means is that all those neighborhoods, poor communities that are low status, that generally their health outcomes are lower, educational attainment is also lower, there's more poverty and unemployment. Those communities have a tendency, people have a tendency to believe that inequality is assumed both inside and outside of those neighborhoods. And we're also, the talented ones in those neighborhoods are taught to measure success by how far they get away from those communities. Our approach to development is really about creating the type of lifestyle infrastructure that allows people born and raised in those communities to first seek to invest in emotionally, financially, and every other way in their own community, because that's not redevelopment from the outside. That's actually development that's happening from the inside, if they're literally a part of staying in their own communities.
And that's really good to hear, because sometimes you'll see a lot of these areas sort of revamped and you could barely even recognize them. They've really lost some of their charm that made them so distinct and special. How should urban planners go about really maintaining some of this identity that made it so special?
Well, I think instead of expecting urban planners to come up with strategies on how to make it better, how about we really use redevelopment and real estate development as a tool that can also first be used by the people that are in those communities to begin with, as opposed to assuming that these neighborhoods need to be redeveloped from the outside in. How about creating the mechanisms that allow folks to develop it from the inside, so that they're first the ones benefiting from the redevelopment? And that it comes in the form of whether it's maintaining home ownership within those communities or providing people opportunities to actually open their own businesses. People that are born and raised in those communities, that's often that talent retention approach that we use in our redevelopment projects around the country, and certainly in the neighborhood that I was born and raised in, which is the South Bronx in New York City. That's often not the way redevelopment and urban renewal happens. It's almost always this approach where it's deemed that development has to come from the outside, as opposed to assuming that perhaps maybe people in our own communities can be a part of the keys to our own recovery in terms of developing real estate assets there on our own.
And it's certainly more of an approach that really takes away sort of an us versus them when you see new communities coming into a space, really sort of integrating with each other. And I do want to get to this idea of perhaps cookie cutter sort of copy and pasting. How do you make sure that one area that's perhaps had urban renewal, it doesn't look the same as all the others?
Well, if we're developing from the inside, then the culture that is in those communities will stay in those communities. For example, I'm from the South Bronx, which is the birthplace of hip hop and salsa, actually. And the idea with the developments that they're working on there is to maintain that the cultural attributes of our community maintained. We developed a coffee shop there, for example, that is literally a museum to hip hop. You know, many of our DJs are actually, our baristas are actually DJs, and you know, we actually have themed music. The wallpaper on our space is literally about educating people about the roots of hip hop, and the food's really good too, and the coffee as well. But the interesting thing about it is that that's just one small example of how you can create business opportunities to employ people in our community, to create the kind of cultural spaces that people want to hang out in, and basically reinvest in their own community. Other things that we can do that we're working on a consulting level are working in South Bend, Indiana, where we're working with the city, who's actually said to folks there that they want them to be developers in their own right. And so we're going to be acting as advisors for these new community developers that are there. And it's all about working from the inside of their own communities, assuming that they've got some value to share and in support of their own neighborhoods.
Well, certainly a very refreshing approach. Thank you so much. Marjora Carter there, Urban Revitalization Strategy Consultant.